think China has made it quite clear, due to a number of incidents that they want to basically bulldoze our democracy. And TikTok could be a very useful tool for that. It's not just about data access, by the way. It's also just about access to users. Unlike data brokers, who sure, they could sell the Chinese government data. You're scrolling on TikTok hours a day. You're not doing that with data brokers. And they can test things out. They can algorithmically target people. That's a significant risk for a government like China that is an autocracy. Autocracies, shouldn't be running major information platforms.
Jamil, play that out for us. Targeting people, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think that Connor has made a really important point, but in a parenthetical. The kind of data that TikTok collects is data that you can get easily from data brokers. Anybody who wants this kind of data about Americans can buy it from data aggregators and data brokers who have essentially no restrictions on what they can take from social media companies and what they can share, including with foreign governments. And that, I think, is a real concern here, is that this even if you think, as I do, that TikTok's collection of this kind of data is a real problem, a real threat, you have to ask, is this ban going to be effective? And I don't think it is going to be effective, because the same kind of information that TikTok collects is so easily available from data brokers. And security experts across the United States have said that, including the former general counsel of the National Security Agency, who said it in an op-ed in the New York Times late last year. So this is really not a contested point. Everybody recognizes that this kind of data is easily available from data brokers, and that this ban is not going to make a real dent in the Chinese government's ability to surveil Americans or Canadians or anyone else.
Janice, we're all operating here, or at least all of you are operating on the 100% certainty that the Chinese government has access to everything that TikTok picks up on. Is that a given?
I think we have to. I think we make that worst case assumption, Steve, and then still come to the conclusion that the data that ByteDance collects, they can get many, many other ways. And that's what made me put it relatively low down the spectrum. Connor's point that they can try things out, well, frankly, if I were looking for threats to democracy, I would be just as concerned about what's on X, destabilizing democracy, and some of our other social media platforms. And any government in the world can, in fact, and we saw this with Facebook, access American social media platforms and try things out. So I'm still waiting to hear concrete reason why a ban would be effective.
Are you suggesting, Connor, that TikTok is more nefarious than X or Facebook simply because of the Chinese ownership, or is there more to it than that?
Yes, absolutely. The standard that's already established in Canada under the Investment Canada Act is that foreign ownership by a company like China, if it's likely to be abused, that is sufficient for the Minister of Industry to bring a forced divestiture to the cabinet. He doesn't need evidence that it has been abused. Just like we wouldn't need evidence that China would abuse ownership of this TV station if it happened to have it, or would mismanage Ontario's nuclear power plants. That's the level of power that we're talking about when it comes to TikTok. And I think a fundamental disconnect here, by the way, I completely agree that we need to rein in the behavior of social media companies like X and Facebook. We should absolutely do that, but we can rein in that behavior. How do you intend to deliver a subpoena to ByteDance in Beijing, and what do you think they're going to do with it? You cannot enforce privacy legislation on ByteDance. That would be like trying to teach a fish to climb a tree.
Okay, Jamil, you want to comment on that? Not the fish climbing the tree part, but the rest of what Connor had to say.
So I guess I disagree with Connor on this point. I think that there are ways of enforcing privacy regulation. You can, for example, have data localization mandates that require companies like TikTok to store the data they're collecting about a particular set of people in that country. And this is something that U.S. regulators have been, exploring already. And TikTok claims to be storing American data now in the United States. I don't know if that's true, but it's something that can be verified and something that can be enforced. I guess the other thing I would just say on this point is that there is a free speech concern on the other side. It's not just that this ban would be ineffective; it's also that the ban would be a restriction on the ability of Canadians or Americans to access foreign media, and that kind of practice, restricting citizens from accessing foreign media, is something that, for very good reason, has been associated in the past with repressive regimes like the Chinese Communist Party or Iran or Saudi Arabia. Those are the kinds of countries that restrict their citizens from accessing foreign media. And I'm not saying that there are no circumstances in which a democracy should restrict its citizens from accessing foreign media, but we should be pretty wary, I think, about going down that road. And we shouldn't do it when there are other ways of addressing the problem.
That's an angle I was going to get to later, but since we're here, you want to weigh in on that as well? Is this an infringement on free speech?
There's no question. There's no question it's an infringement on free speech. And there has to be a higher standard of security risk when there's an infringement on free speech. It's not that we never do it. Of course, there are circumstances in which we did it. So let me give you an example where I think there's a much stronger case to take action, which was Huawei, as distinct from TikTok. The reason there's a much stronger case on Huawei is the government, part of the government's digital infrastructure, what the government called the core, was being built by Huawei. Well, it makes no sense to allow core digital infrastructure to be built by a company that is run out of China.
But this isn't that.
That's what I'm saying. This is, in fact, an entirely different proposition with TikTok, where you can get the data anyway. The argument of experimentation is just not persuasive. And I think on balance, then, Jamal's argument about free speech really matters.
Connor, no concerns about an infringement on free speech here?
I mean, I agreed with the restrictions on Huawei. I think to suggest that Huawei was clearly more of a threat than TikTok really signals a failure of imagination when it comes to how destructive social media can be when directed to divide citizens or deliver messages that are undermining our democracy. I do see the free speech argument. I'm concerned about that. I think this should be, as narrowly tailored as possible. But basically, my sense is that sort of no matter what road you go down here, you end up with a forced divestiture, whether that's privacy legislation, whether that's trying to take a more narrowly tailored approach. Take the algorithm, for instance. Sure, you could have TikTok store data in the US or store data in Canada, but ByteDance is ultimately going to control the algorithm, and it ultimately is going to control TikTok. And we won't be able to enforce any of these rules. And then we'll end up in a place where the only option left is divestiture, and all we've done is we've wasted years and quite a lot of legal fees to end up at the same result.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.